We're always trying new things here at 19.9, and one of the things I wanted to highlight was the Chucker Stories page. And there's some other contributors like Ian Stonebrook who have the written word on the 19.9 website. So if you go to the 19.9 website under the Stories tab, you'll get these deep insights into some of the collections that 19.9's dropping and just a different perspective on it. And what I wanted to do here is just have the Chucker jump on, or maybe some of the other contributors jump on and talk a little bit about the stories they've contributed there, expand on them a little bit, and maybe go in some different directions, just getting the back and forth. So hope you enjoy, and we'll try to do these more often if we get some good feedback on them. We've got a special guest coming on the podcast this evening. It's our resident historian, the Chucker. He's also a co-host and writes for the website. And I wanted to specifically call out his DePaul article that's going to drop on the website. You can go check it out there under the Stories tab. He talked about a famous coach who shares my last name, Ray Meyer. So what led you to that besides your geolocation there in Chicago?
Well, not only that, it just goes well with the great launch of 19.9 DePaul gear that's coming up here on February 11th. So, I think we always like to tie story to product, and it just gives us a richer kind of sense of kind of what everything is and allows us to celebrate basketball history. So I think, we talk here about Ray Meyer, who is the kind of monumental figure in DePaul hoops, and he's a guy who took over the program around the time of the World War II and guided it for the next 40-some seasons and really led DePaul to new heights and really not only just a basketball program, but really kind of raised the profile of the university. For those who don't know, DePaul is the largest Catholic university in the world, and wow. I think a part of its marketing ability is really tied to the basketball team and the success they had under Ray Meyer.
Yeah, these coaches that come along like this that seem to span almost the entire history of like basketball. That you go right in here, start kind of with talking about the elevated train in Chicago, which as a person who traveled to Chicago all the time is kind of iconic there. But he then brings in a big man who is the forebearer of sort of the evolution of basketball. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Ray Meyer starts at DePaul in 1942, and not long after he arrives there, on a one-year contract, mind you.
Yeah, I love that.
He insisted on a one-year contract because he wasn't sure if he'd like the job. He was an assistant coach at Notre Dame. He's a Chicago-born and bred guy, but he had played at Notre Dame, so he's assistant coach there. DePaul offers him the job. He's not sure if he's going to like being the head coach at DePaul, which at that time is not even on the national radar, certainly. But anyway, he comes not long after he arrives in 1942. This monstrous freshman shows up named George Mikan, who's a Chicago kid, and he's 6'10" and never played high school basketball.
Wow.
And Ray Meyer turns him into this, under his tutelage, George Mikan leads DePaul to the Final Four and then becomes one of the game's greats. And it's so fascinating because with Mikan, you go back to now. Now in basketball, we see 6'10", 6'11", 7-footer guys all over the court. Now they're stretch fives. But when Mikan played, he was legitimately called a freak show everywhere he went because being tall was not an attractive quality, even for basketball players. So you'd see a lot of tall guys hunch down and try to make themselves shorter. But Meyer really encouraged Mikan to kind of be proud of that height and to use it as a dominating force. And he was on both sides of the court. And arguably, he's literally the first star in the NBA after he leaves DePaul and goes to the NBA, leads the Lakers to a bunch of titles. He's really the first NBA star. And so, but that all happens because, Ray Meyer sees Mikan and turns him into one of the game's greats.
Yeah, that changed the rules around Mikan. He's so big that they had to widen the lane to what it is today. It's just wild how much he influenced the game. You had that detail in there that his first contract was only $2,500. So you might understand why he wanted to take just a 1-year deal on that. But it didn't stay that way.
He insisted on a 1-year $2,500 contract.
Right.
Now that's like a shoe budget for the year for a coach.
No doubt. That's a cheap NIL deal.
Man, oh God, it's probably an NIL deal for a walk-on.
Right.
These days. But so yeah, pretty wild. But it's just crazy to think. You think about 1942. he arrives there. They're playing in like an old auditorium that's been converted into a gym. They call it the Barn. And I mean, he just transforms that place. Has all these winning seasons. Again, it has an early Final Four run in the 1940s, but then all these successful seasons obviously culminates in 1979 when he leads that DePaul program to the Final Four, led by Mark Aguirre. And it just, DePaul is just that transforms not only the basketball program but the university, and Ray Meyer is the point person for that.
Yeah, he built that really into a national brand. I think that's what, if you hear DePaul still, even though they haven't been good now again for a long time, it still rings out with, is associated with basketball.
Yeah, I'm 41 years old, but for guys of my age, and certainly those who are 10, 20 years older than me, who grew up in Chicago loving basketball, DePaul is the team in Chicago. And it's been a little disappointing that they've been tough to rally around really for the last 20 years. They haven't had any sustained success. You'll have it here and there, little peaks, but for the most part, there's no sustained success really since the 1990s and early 1990s. You had a little run in right around the late 90s with Quentin Richardson and Bobby Simmons, and DePaul it just captures the city. We want to root for, I think, basketball greatness. And we had that in DePaul when Meyer was there. Ray Meyer was on the sidelines. And keep in mind that before, Michael Jordan shows up in Chicago in 1984, but before he arrives, basketball in Chicago is DePaul. It's not the Chicago Bulls.
That's a great.
It's DePaul. So
yeah, they're playing at the Rosemont Horizon, right? They eventually moved into that stadium that seats like 18,000, something like that, people.
Yeah, and that stadium is built in large part with DePaul in mind as the anchor tenant. It hosts tons of concerts and
monster truck rallies,
circuses, and monster truck battles and stuff. But DePaul is kind of the headline act there, in terms of a regular tenant. And, now DePaul plays in a new stadium, the Wintrust Arena, that's kind of near McCormick Place, for those who might be familiar with Chicago. It's right south of basically downtown. It's about a 25-minute L ride from campus, straight south of campus, basically. But, yeah, they filled the Horizon, now Allstate Arena, but they filled that for years and years and years. That was the place to go see basketball in Chicago until MJ took Chicago by storm. But.
Well, the great thing about hardwood history is that you can relive the good times and look good doing it. So I've been appreciating that as an IU fan at times this year, that the gear looks good no matter what my face says about the game the night before.
Yeah, no question, man. And, there's all these, the one thing I love about doing so much of this work for 1990 and kind of digging into these stories is you unearth all these, little nuggets, like the 1-year contract that Meyer signed. Something I knew before I did this was Ray Meyer was the point guard on a national championship high school team in high school.
Wow.
And so you hear these, really, again, I knew that, but then that's just a great little nugget, and then you find all these other little nuggets out. Ray Meyer never went on a recruiting trip out of Illinois until he was in the advanced stages of his career.
I loved
he was
that.
in his 60s.
Yeah, that was great. 69. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and it's just crazy to think that you have that run of success and you never recruit. You never go on a recruiting trip. Now you're getting talent from outside of Illinois, but you never go on a recruiting trip outside of Illinois until much later on. So it's just wild to think how much the game has changed, and how a guy like Ray Meyer. The one thing I love and people who read the piece in the story section of the 1999 tab will see this, is he has this quote where he says, "Go ahead, find me a guy who came to DePaul and didn't develop. We developed them all." And he's pretty right. Mark Aguirre was a star before. He was kind of a local hoops legend as a prep star at Westinghouse High School. But, he became something completely different. He was kind of one of the first freshman phenoms because he leads DePaul to the Final Four as a freshman in 1979. So, but all these guys, Mikan being the first to Aguirre, it's pretty wild. So, and that's Ray Meyer. That's the power of Ray Meyer, who is, I think, a great coach. I think, again, guys who of my age, certainly a little bit older, grew up in Chicago, they remember his basketball camp. It was in northern Wisconsin. Like, that's where you wanted to go to, like, learn the game. That was like on everyone's to-do list. If you were aspiring basketball player, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, that camp was pretty legendary. So,
well, I loved the stories. And it was so exciting to just relive that kind of the hazy memories I had and kind of bring them into the focus that you brought to this. So appreciate the other interviews you've done lately with the Hoosiers, Brad Long and Tipton and Vahe Gregorian. I was actually just listening to one that will come out about the ACC, and some of his stories were absolutely fantastic. I think that's one of the best ones you've ever done. So
yeah, that's David Teal, longtime reporter in the Mid-Atlantic, and he's kind of known a little bit as the unofficial commissioner of the ACC, really tapped into that market. We got some other cool stuff coming up. So I know we got Jeff Fryer from Loyola Marymount. He'll be coming up on the podcast. He was a teammate of Bo Kimball and Hank Gathers on that memorable 1990s Loyola Marymount team. And then we got, I think, a really awesome one, Mark Vershaw, who was a leading scorer on Wisconsin's Final Four team in 2000. Really one of my favorite podcasts, I think, interviews I've ever done. Mark was extremely engaging, told great stories, man. We got some great stuff coming up here in the 99
No doubt. Well, I appreciate all the hard work, and we'll check in again soon.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.
All right, man.